that have been called game criticism for a while, and I've become immensely frustrated. So in some sense, this is me trying to come to grasp with my frustration and trying in hopefully constructive manner. So who am I? I'm a game designer. I run a website called bossgarden.com, which talks a lot about game design. I've made a whole bunch of games recently. Lately we started a company called Spryfox, where we've made Triple Town, Realm of Mad Gods, Steambirds. And before that I worked at Microsoft Game Studios, and before that Epic Mega Games. I've been doing this for about 16 years. And I've sort of seen this interesting transformation of how people talk about games. And it's that transformation that has been immensely frustrating. So what is game criticism? This is one of the questions that I first asked. I was like, all right, people are saying, oh, game criticism, it's this amazing thing, we have to do it, it's really important. It's going to change how the industry goes forward, we're going to be respected, everything's going to be wonderful. And then it's all, well, what is it? And I can't get a direct answer. So there's reviews, and those are, by the way, not game criticism, even though whenever someone points to game criticism, it's usually a review. There's regurgitated PR. There's companies that are putting stuff out there and people are spitting it back to players. There's playthroughs. So someone will go, like there was a new game journalism movement, and I'm mangling it, so I apologize to all those involved, which was, hey, I played a game and now I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to talk about my emotions, and then I'll put that human moment into my writing. There's the culture of gamers. Hey, there's all these people playing games. Look, they like to dress up in costumes. Isn't that cool? You know? Or, oh, they have this opinion about this thing that someone else had an opinion about, and as a gamer, how do they feel? There's a group of academics who have come in who are like, oh, games are just like literature, or games are just like movies, or hey, I'm trying to start a new department and I need some funding. There's this thing called games. Why don't we talk about that? There's people in the sciences. I was just at a conference on HCI, human-computer interaction. And they're like, all right, people are interacting with games in these complex ways, and they're doing new interfaces all the time. And how do we understand that? What is that? How do we study that? So there's one girl I was talking to who's doing this thing where she desperately wants to get funding to make a first-person shooter in all its amazing glory. And the experiment that she's going to run is she's going to have the grass wave in this. And by changing the amount that the grass waves, she's going to correlate that with the performance of the players. So it's this, it's this people trying to apply these very, very rigorous scientific concepts to this thing that is this crazy mixture of art and science and craft. Industry analysis, who's going up, who's going down, who's going bankrupt. Game analysis, like what is the nature of games? And then what this talk is what the heck is game criticism? What is, it's kind of a meta discussion, talking about things. And all this is stuck in this mass, and depending on who you talk to, you may or may not trigger the word game criticism. So it's very, very confusing. This is sort of my breakdown from a developer perspective. Like, I think of it, so I have a very developer-centric point of view. We make games, that's what we do, and we drop the games as this giant stone into the culture of humanity, right? We drop it, and boom, these ripples go outward from there. And this is a very developer-centric viewpoint. And the things that I care about is I care about the game and the interaction with the players. Because in my mind, the two are exactly the same. When we make a game, we're creating code that runs on human hardware. And so there's this intimate loop of like, hey, look, here's the game, here's the rules, here's how it intersects with people, here's how people intersect with the game. And that's that interesting, fascinating system that I care about as a game developer. Now, secondary to all that, you have PR happening, you have reviews happening, you have people trying to explain like, well, how do we make games better happening, you have just player reactions. So we were having a discussion about lunch. Like, games are an experience, right? And so let's say I'm walking down the street this morning, and some guy comes up to me and he punches me in the face. I want to tell you about that the next day. Like, if I meet you, I'm going to say, by the way, I got punched in the face. And it's just an inherent, natural thing. Whenever I have a memorable, meaningful experience to myself, I want to tell you about it. And that's the storytelling instinct, right? That comes up from the gut. We do it all the time because hopefully you'll be able to avoid that guy who punched you in the face. Or if it was a pleasurable experience, you'll be able to find him and say, hey. Maybe you can do that for me too. And then finally outside of that, you start getting these eddies, these ripples in this stone dropping, which are like gamer culture, right? You know, you start having people who, they've played games and they've reacted to games and they see this sort of like, you know, the mega text of games that is around it and how they participated and how it fits into their identity. And you start seeing the economic side of it, the industry analysts who are going and saying, oh, well, these are the amount of money it's and here's the resources that are going back and forth and all around, and it's really, really meaningful because of the money. And of course, the scientists are trying to analyze it, and the humanities are trying to like form little kingdoms out of it. But this is sort of the developer-centric viewpoint of this. And I look at it and I say, well, you know, we got a game, we got a player, we have developers. The other stuff's nice, but it doesn't really change what we do. So I started asking questions, and we had this wonderful conversation last night. And it's like, well, is there another way of looking at this? And there's this thing that is game criticism. And I said, well, what if we look at that, instead of looking at this massive mess with all these secondary reactions, people enjoy doing this thing called criticism, and they have rules for it. So maybe I can gain insight by applying what I know. Like I see things as games all the time. I see Facebook as a game, I see Twitter as a game, I see a lot of businesses as a game. Maybe we can look at this thing called criticism, we can treat it as a game, and by doing that, explain it to me as a developer in a way that I can't currently gain access to it. So this is a wonderful quote. Chris Bateman, who's right here, quoted this in his book, Imaginary Games, and he talks about how art is actually, you can see art as a game. So Duchamp, art is a game between all people and all periods. And you know, he was the one who was doing that. He was the toilet fellow, wasn't he? He's like, I declare this as art, now critics do your job on this, right? And now I've declared it as art, you're forced to, ha ha ha. You can say, well, now we can look at this art and we can look at how critics fit into that system, and we can see that they're playing a game. And that will hopefully give us a little bit of insight. So here's the game of criticism. So there's artists, those are our user-generated content system, right? And then if you get a large enough population of artists and there's enough viewers who are interested in it, you start getting collectors and speculators upon that art. There are people who say, all right, there's these paintings, I'm going to collect them, I'm going to become a clearinghouse for them, and then I'm going to hopefully build this very, very strong relationship with the viewers or appreciators of that art, and I'll gain some money out of it, but there's also a huge amount of status and so on and so forth. Now, the collectors may not actually be good at picking things that they pick. So that creates this fascinating role for the critics, who sort of form the rule of referees or judges. And Duchamp was a genius this way because he recognized that a toilet is not traditionally considered art, but by creating the toilet and calling it art and selling it to the collectors, then I'm going to get this massive PR buzz from the critics who are going to suddenly jump on, and they're going to put on their, soccer referee uniforms, and they're going to be like, red flag, that's completely wrong. And then other people are saying, well, he called it art, and then, and suddenly he gets this amazing sort of like PR boost based off of that. And then the viewers kind of are following along because ultimately they don't have a lot of connection with the artists. They do have a connection with either the galleries or the museums or something like that. So in some sense, they're being educated by those people. And the collectors in terms of it are in turn being educated by the critics. So it's this it's kind of like a game of Team Fortress 2, right? Everyone has a role to play here, the support classes, and they all interact in this nice ecosystem. So you can have the artists by themselves. You can have the artists connected with the viewers, which is not less common in more mass media. But as soon as you start getting those collectors, there starts being this niche for critics. Now, what type of game is this? Now, we just had a panel on reviews, and this is not necessarily a you should buy this or you should not buy this. Like any good, deep, optional game, the utility is secondary here. This isn't about critics saying, oh, if I provide 5 units of value, I'll get paid, 3 clams, and life is good, and that's what I'm here for. It's a game, right? So it's a game of status. Can you become top critic? Can you be popular critic? Can you be a respected critic? It's a game of performance. So can I be an entertaining critic? It's a game of skill. Do I play the game of criticism well? Do I talk about this using the appropriate language? Do I reference the right people? And as a game, so has anyone here had the moment where you've seen someone playing NetHack and you don't understand why they like that? This is a self-contained value structure. That's what games do. They create a magic circle, and it's permeable. There's some stuff that goes in and out, but it's a self-contained value structure. So the people playing this game find immense joy and value and skill in the act of game criticism, or act of criticism, independent of what the person looking over the shoulder and just seeing crazy ASCII art does. And for me, that was like, oh, that makes sense. Like a lot of the comments about, well, it's not about the money, it's not about this, it's about the joy of reacting to these games and playing off them and having this conversation. So the question that I asked is all right, 5,000 years of history about games. Where the heck has criticism been? If you go back to 3,500 BC, you have one of the first board games, the Egyptian board game Senet. There's just this insane gap between hey, look, people have been playing for a long time, and there hasn't been game criticism. So it's this very, very, very recent development. And the question is, well, where the heck is that coming from? Why is this game becoming popular now? And there's a couple things. One, you have journalists, and they've been doing sort of this review cycle, and it can be crushing, and we heard the horror stories associated with that. And there's this idea of hey, maybe there's higher meaning here. Maybe if we can become these people who are playing this game of beauty and joy and just playing that game well, maybe there's meaning in playing well. And so they're well, who else is doing this? Movie critics are doing this, so on and so forth. Academics have this strong territorial. They're playing their own crazy academic game, and they're trying to grab portions of human knowledge and experience and claim ownership to it through papers and so on and so forth. And there's only so many positions for someone who is a film studies person. But if you can go and you can branch out into other fields, then there's an interesting, territorial grab that you can do. And now, when all these are not done in any sort of meanness. This is not done in any sort of, this is just these are factors on the players that cause them to act in a certain way. And then developers. Developers have been told for ages that their games are pointless and crap and tripe and so on and so forth, a kitsch. And they want status. I know developers who've been doing this for 20 odd years or so, and they're like, well, why won't you give me respect? And how can we get respect? Well, status is one of the cool promises of the game of criticism, right? So there's some desire there. And then there's students and fans, and they sort of are, in some sense, wannabes, and they're filtering up into these things as well. But the big thing for me is collectors have appeared. That initial loop that we saw, suddenly you have aggregators and you have people saying, there's this audience of games, we're going to try to put all these people together, we're going to try to curate a set of games. How do we curate those? What does that mean? And as soon as you get collectors, as soon as you get curators, that creates that game niche for critics to actually do a job. So if there's not a damage system, you can't have a healing class. That's what we're seeing here. Now, it's new, right? People are just starting to play this game. It's, in the 5,000 years that they've had an opportunity, they haven't been doing it very long. So there's a lot of newbie mistakes, noise, lack of common vocabulary, this crazy tribalism. It's amazing how many little attacks go back and forth. In fact, it's arguably one of the ways that you play the game. Economics. So many people are like, I don't want to pay for this. This has no economic value to me, so I'm not going to pay you. People are constantly starving and saying, I'll just do it for free, please. I got punched in the face, please listen to me. Now, as a game developer, I see all this, and this is what I react to. This is the source of my anger, right? There's very little sense of history. A large number of the people talking, they've been punched in the face by a specific console game, right? BioShock, I love BioShock. Let me write pages upon pages upon pages of BioShock stuff, right? And they have no idea where that came from or what the history of it is, and they're like, Peter Molyneux, he's a jerk because he made Fable. And it's like, no, there's other games he made. There's a history here. There's this sense that ignorance is a good thing. Like, I'm reacting naively to this, and therefore my naive reaction is what the really important thing is. I should never educate myself because I'll lose my naivete. This gets into the nature of games, like game developers associated with programmer. I tell people, like, you should make games and understand how games are made. And they're like, I don't want to learn C++. And it's like, do you have a deck of cards? Could you perhaps sit down at a table and make up some rules for an alternative to poker? I bet you it would take you 5 minutes to do the exercise. And they're like, what? And then here we get to this giant gap. They were punched in the face by BioShock. Tag, Monopoly, those aren't the things that they want to write about. So there's this huge gap in understanding that 99% of what you get in a board game or a sports game is what you get in a video game. And if you don't understand that 5,000 years of gaming and why that worked, then you're missing the point of games. And so that's immensely frustrating to observe. So I'll just go over this briefly. Like, I don't think games are actually a media in the way that movies or literature is. I think games are a fundamental human a human system. It's a system of play, and it's an official way of doing that. It's an authoritative way of doing that, but it's more closer to like economics or physics or mathematics or government, right? And you have criticism of those systems, but they're economics criticism. They're not art criticism. You don't do art criticism of capitalism. You can, but it's this weird little niche thing that's more of an intellectual exercise than the point of economics. So we're making these crazy, awesome, amazing things facilitated by computers where we can run code on vast quantities of human brains in a scalable fashion. That is not the same thing as literature. It is not the same tools as literature. It is not the same. Mechanics or process or end result as literature. The emotions you experience when you get punched in boxing, which is a game about being punched in the head, are radically different than reading a book about boxing. It's a different thing. And so to use some of these, to colonize games from this other area, it's interesting and it's intriguing and I encourage it, but it should no means be the dominant discussion of games. So I want game analysis. I think there's all sorts of people, and there's probably more people who should be on this list, who have written about what is the nature of games. It's more like economists writing about economy. There's Adam Smith who writes about economy, right? These are the people who are writing about games as games. And what's interesting about them is it's not a naive attitude. It is writing informed by practice. They're trying to make games, they're seeing what works, they're recording what happens, and they're advancing human knowledge of this area that has hitherto been poorly studied. So I want more of that, and that would be my dream. I don't know if we'll get it. But this talk, in some sense, is an example of that. We just talked about the game of criticism, using some of the concepts of game analysis. So I could have just as easily gone through and said, here's the economic analysis of game criticism. Here's where the money flows. Here's how it all works. Instead, I talked about, here's the motivations, here's the status, here's the performance, here's the skill, so on and so forth. Here's the roles that you play. And I want to see more of that. And if the traditional literary and movie criticism comes across for the ride and is an intellectually interesting thing, hallelujah. Yeah.
Professional amateur, ladies and gentlemen.
Woo! There's often a crazy presentation mode. Okay, no, that's cool. Or I can just screw everything up.
Just the baseline.
If you're looking for presentation mode, it's in slideshow.
Yeah.
Well, he's not using it.
Good, that's good.
Okay.
That'll work. My slides don't have any cool educational charts on them because I don't know how to make those. They are strictly to remind me of what to stay on topic. There might be a rabbit in there for all I know, just for that. Hi, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Bob Chipman. This is game criticism because who asked you? And believe it or not, I volunteered to follow that. What's wrong with me? Okay. So this is me. I am the creator and host of Escape to the Movies and The Big Picture for Escapist Magazine, the Game Overthinker for ScrewAttack.com, and American Bob, wherever I want to put that. It's on YouTube right now. So I'm obviously here to give what's more or less the rebuttal. I guess I am on the other side. I am a film critic and game commentator. I don't think what falls into game criticism, but they're similar, and we're talking about film criticism and such invading game criticism, quote unquote. So there is that. So I can do I have to talk about that. Of course, I feel a little bit like I'm in in enemy territory, or rather, I'm an enemy in someone's territory in the sense of being a film person in the games world. Obviously, we have a lot of people feel that the games industry really wants to be Hollywood because it does, and that there's an issue with that. So please get it out of your systems now. Oh, go ahead. All right. Now, of course, we all know that this is Roger, who's known as the world's most famous film critic, and people ask all the time, well, where is the Roger Ebert of video games? Who is that? And I think it bears worth reminding, we call gaming a young medium. We don't say that that's what it's important. It's vibrant because it's in video gaming. I stress, obviously, traditional gaming, as you said, goes back to, all the way to Egypt and probably before that. But video games themselves have been around for, only about, 30, 35 to 40 years, if you want to go all the way back to the earliest, most experimental stuff. I'm sure I could put a more precise number, but it's about 30, 40 years as far as that is concerned.
I was just Space War 50.
Space War 50. So it goes back. It's younger than a lot of other mediums that it's often compared to. It's film. Was 1880, for example. So we often ask ourselves that who's the Roger Ebert of game criticism? Roger Ebert wasn't around until the 70s. And the first movies were made in 1890, and the first serious film criticism didn't arrive until the late 40s, early 50s in Cahiers du Cinema. On that same lines, we constantly have people asking, where's our Citizen Kane? Where is video gaming Citizen Kane? Citizen Kane was made in 1941. First motion picture film was shot in 1890. 60 years, give or take, to get from there to the Thomas Edison film with the two guys ballroom dancing to Citizen Kane, which is eventually considered the greatest film of all time, but was largely ignored upon its own release for the most part. It was nominated for stuff, but not really. And if you want to get really macro about that, where's our Mona Lisa? We've heard, where's our Mona Lisa? Where's all that? Mona Lisa is a painting. Earliest form of human painting that anyone has found is in a cave in Chauvet, France. The Mona Lisa was not painted for another 31,400 years. It takes a long time to get to the Mona Lisa. I don't know that we're there yet, that gaming is there yet. I know that sounds like a trivializing and whatnot, that you said, well, it's not good enough yet. Not necessarily, but things take time to evolve, and maybe we're asking too much of both gaming and game critics when we're asking them, to, okay, this medium is here, it's as big as movies, literature, art, whatever, therefore it should be producing stuff that has, an equal counterpart. Not necessarily. I don't know. I actually forgot what the next slide was, so this is going to be an experiment for all of us. Okay, criticism, as I said, everyone likes. Those love Jay Sherman. But criticism evolved from being just reviews to being an art form in and of itself, as again, largely a recent event in terms of human literature from the early 19th century, when you started having people writing criticism as an art form in and of itself, where people weren't just reading it to find out what was good, but reading the review as a piece of literature or a piece of oratory in and of itself. Gaming has not had that tradition for, at least in a publicly, widely recognized way, for nearly as long as other such things. Some would argue that it's on a timeline almost non-existent, that we have primarily reviewers, which serve a function in and of themselves, but review is not necessarily criticism, even though many critics justify their existence by allowing their criticisms to be placed as reviews. I go back to Roger Ebert. If you speak to him, he will tell you, now through his computer, but he will tell you that he finds the stars that are assigned to his reviews completely meaningless. That he writes his reviews as essays about film, and he has to assign a score because he has to. And much as in a previous panel I was on to talk about Metacritic, people do not necessarily want to put scores in their reviews, but they have to because game critics are being asked to largely be product reviewers, not just aesthetic critics. But there is this divide, where you have to write 2 reviews at once. You're also saying, well, this is what it means aesthetically, this is, story and feeling and, all these meta-narratives, but also, here's how the controls work and here's how everything else. And how frustrating is that if you have something in front of you that is aesthetically beautiful and moves you in some way, and then you also have to say, but the hit detection sucks and I really have to mark it down now. How do you square that? No, I'm asking, how do you square that? I don't know. That wasn't rhetorical. This is partly why I'm not a game critic. I can't answer that question. I don't know how to score something like that. That's an alien thing to where I'm from, whereas in film criticism, if something doesn't work technically, it also means something doesn't work aesthetically and emotionally and whatnot. That doesn't necessarily seem to be true in a lot of gaming, how many great, what are remembered as great, wonderful games that we've all loved, would we have to junk completely if we had to be honest about their narrative structure, their screenplay? Not for nothing, if I was to say, Mass Effect has great writing, I think that would almost be universally agreed upon, that Mass Effect has great writing, ... for gaming. It has good writing, well put together for its own purposes. Take a Mass Effect campaign and turn it into a screenplay, and you have a subpar episode of Babylon 5. Which is still not a bad episode of something, but there it is, and that's just like the best, most relevant deal. There are games that have great writing, it's not always necessarily their main component, and then you're dealing with translation and all of this other business. And I think that's another function of being a young medium. Film didn't have good writing at first. Some of the earliest films had terrible scripts, terrible dialogue. No one knew how human beings were supposed to talk. Things happened for no reason. People seen Birth of a Nation. Narratively, it's not, you take out the Ku Klux Klan thing. It's only the entire second half of the movie, but ignore it for a moment. And the screenplay is actually very rote and not at all complex, and would have been negatively compared to, and was negatively compared to, books and other narrative devices at the time. It was seen as, well, it's film, we let it slide. It wasn't until much later on people decided, this should probably sound good too. It's the function of a young medium. And unfortunately, what may also be a fundamentally immature medium. And I mean that in, this is what I mean about being in enemy territory, and I mean that in, both as a pejorative, but also as just a basic descriptive. You have gaming as a young industry that's still figuring out what it wants to be. How old is gaming? Goes back about 50 years. How old is narrative gaming? how far back do you want to go on that? Did Pac-Man have a narrative because, here's some ghosts and here's some guys? Is the first narrative Donkey Kong because they said that's a girl, you want it back? Was it a text-based adventure? I mean, those are narrative, it counts, but is that how far back we want to go in that respect? And is narrative an all-important thing? Most major art forms in the 20th century are narrative. Music is narrative. Music, the majority of great songs that people remember tell a story. That's why electronic music was so, maybe not a good story, but they tell a story. That's why electronic music was so revolutionary when Works came out. It's like, wait a minute, this is just sound? Well, that's going all the way back and yet all the way forward. Things evolve. The other problem is that you're fundamentally dealing with people who have grown up in a medium, are still the majority of people writing about it. We're only just now having the first generation of a lot of developers and a lot of designers and writers and whatnot being people who grew up with gaming. And it was not just something that was around for them, but it was a fundamental building block of their lives, of their childhoods, of memories. And that can be very powerful when skewing things. This is partially one of the reasons that I am not involved in game criticism, because you would not get honest reviews out of me of certain things. If you put the whatever they're calling the DS Mario game in front of me, you're not going to get an honest aesthetic review of that from me. You're going to get 30 paragraphs of me freaking out that I can be a raccoon again, because they haven't done it in 15 years and I missed it. I mean, how many of us had this as children? And when I put this, see people, almost everyone is smiling right now. And now, are you smiling because you remember this as an exceptionally well put together piece of hardware? Not really. You remember the pain in your hands. Do you remember it as something that had these very technical things that you grasped and that you were into? Or are you remembering Christmas morning, 1983? Are you remembering a really good birthday? Are you remembering, a friend, or the console you grew up with as your choice, or a PC game that you grew up with? Are you remembering, if I throw a picture of the Oregon Trail right now, are you going to think about, whatever was the revolutionary mechanic about that, of, using it as an entertainment tool? Or are you going to remember, oh my God, I'm playing a video game in school, this is scandalous. and we remember this, it was like, I'm learning, but it's a game. I remember feeling betrayed by that. It's like, no, I was just trying to catch Carmen. I didn't want to remember where she went. But there we go. If I threw right now, everyone probably had, a toy or a cherished pet or something as a child. If I conjured it up in front of you right now, could you give me an honest review of it? I'm seriously, if you put, if I put it right there in front of you, teddy bear, puppy, bike, tricycle, Red Rider, whatever it was in front of you, and it's the exact one, could I get an honest aesthetic criticism? Could I get someone to say, I throw it up like a teddy bear, well, the stitching is really not so great, and the eyes are, Mr. Fuzzy. No, you're going to get that. If you put a He-Man in front of me right now, the only problem I'm going to have is I don't also have a Skeletor and I can't do anything. That's what I'm going to get. And that's obviously I'm being broad about that for effect because I enjoy applause. It makes me happy and it's good for my ego. But the point being, so much of Are we all pretty much here because we loved games in youth, and now we want to be in that business as adults? Is that something that would be true for probably close to 80 to 90% of the people attending this convention? Probably true. That informs partially why games criticism is in the not spectacular state that it's in, because you have people either writing from or reacting to memory, nostalgia, powerful, potent inner feelings, instead of dry, technical, aesthetic dissection, basically. And it cuts both ways. It makes us be too hard on stuff that we might not be too hard on, and it makes us too soft on stuff that we shouldn't be too soft on. Just wait 15 years until kids who grew up on Halo are reviewing remakes of Halo. And then, see how much emotion is bound up in that because they're remembering their first headshot. That wasn't Fane, I'm actually coughing. So we've, as a response, we've developed very, very heavy counterweights. I don't have to tell anyone who this is. And I don't have to tell anyone that he's very popular, and that there's people have often tried to figure out why. Why was Yahtzee, Khrushchev, Zero Punctuation such a bolt out of the blue to games criticism? Whatever you think of his actual product, why was that such a big deal when it first happened? It wasn't the accent, it's not the hat, it's not the yellow background, though those are all nice. what was so refreshing about him was that he came out and actually he did the job of a critic. That's not a good sign for the rest of game criticism when someone shows up and actually says, you know, no nostalgic emotion, no extra BS, just I'm going to pick this thing apart and look at it and go at it. Doing that on a wide scale was huge at the time. That's kind of scary. That's like if the world's best baseball player or most popular baseball player was the first guy to actually hit the ball. And we've also developed reactions against the nostalgic element of it. We all probably know who this is. We're probably aware of James Rolfe, the angry Nintendo nerd, come angry video game nerd, who made another guy who showed up pretty much out of nowhere, reviewing bad old games. Even that was considered revolutionary at the time. The idea of saying like, no, the NES era was not this, you know, unvarnished, you know, beautiful, potent thing. There was, you know, bad in there too, and I'm going to pick that apart. We don't do that now with bad games. A bad game comes out, it gets a bad review, you know, the review has done its job because all anyone wanted to know was the score, and we put the bad game on the shelf and we forget about it and we never talk about it again. No other medium does that. Bad books, bad movies, bad music are discussed forever, often longer than good ones.
Yeah.
If those of you who are familiar with James, he started off on a review of the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from the NES. Terrible game, very badly remembered, if remembered at all, but as an experiment, kind of picked it apart and dug into, tried to find some kind of, you know, mythic thing about it, some narrative element. Well, maybe it's trying to say something in going backwards and forwards. He was joking, but it's kind of amazing that that would be new enough to be a joke, that people are going into something and saying, well, maybe there's a bigger meaning here, maybe there's depth. Do we all know what this is? Plan 9 from Outer Space. Widely considered the worst film ever made until The Room was made 2 years ago. This movie has been talked about more than most good movies. People teach classes about it. They write books about it. They made a movie about the making of this movie with Johnny Depp, directed by Tim Burton when that mattered. Martin Landau won an Oscar for it. Has anyone made a game about bad games? Matt Hazard doesn't count. I don't know that that's been done. I don't know that there's. I'm sure it has been done, and I just don't know about it because I'm, you know, painfully ignorant.
Game dev story.
Oh, well, there you go. But it's the fact that that's something that people have to rack their brains about. That's a problem. That we're not going back over them. If we just throw them out. Again, I'm trying to keep myself on track with my own pictures here. We review the bad game, and then we throw it out, and then we don't talk about it anymore. How long did we wait for this? 15 years, 20 years, 15, right? My math is terrible, but it's got to be about 15 years. People wrote about, what's it going to be? What's going to happen? It went from being anticipated, to being never going to happen, to being a joke, to being a holy shit. It came out, it wasn't good, now we've all moved on. Is anyone going to write the book about Duke Nukem Forever like they write in the books about Plan 9? I could get 20 people to come over to my house tomorrow night for a Plan 9 viewing party. I'm not going to get the same amount of people to come over and talk about how much Duke Nukem Forever sucked. I'm not going to get people to come over and do jokes. No one is going to ironically dress up as Duke the way that they dress up as Tor Johnson and Vampira and all these other people. That's I don't need to keep going back to film, other than that it's my primary area of expertise, but also the games industry, the AAA side of it, wants to be Hollywood in the worst way. That's a huge problem, but that's why I think the metaphor holds. If they're trying to be movies, I'll compare them to movies. I'll compare to movies all day long. Now this also came out recently, Dante's Inferno. When's the last time, before I put this slide up, when's the last time anyone had thought about this game? Recently?
About a week ago.
About a week ago? Okay, not bad, not
We're
bad.
actually discussing like how it related to the original poem and stuff.
See, I wish more of that was going on.
Yeah.
I mean, this should, even though it was a bad game, the making of it should have been monumental. When's the last time someone sat down and said, you know what, I'm going to make an action game out of, it almost felt like a parody. I wish it was more of a parody. You know, Troma knows what they're doing with that. You know, Tromeo and Juliet owns this, doing the same shtick. You know, of taking, you know, a classic and saying, you know what, I'm going to make a tarted up, you know, gory action BS out of this. But now no one's talking about it. Well, obviously you were talking about it, but I mean, I can't go hunt that down. You know, I can find, you know, books and libraries worth of books talking about movies that didn't work. How long are people still going to be talking about the Star Wars movies, the new 3 ones? People have made movies about those movies not living up to their expectations. We don't have that. And I'm wondering why not? Because we don't take the criticism itself seriously. Because we're not regarding it as anything more than a review of something you just look at, say, well, this tells me how it was, whether or not I'm going to buy it, and then it's done, it's over. If we're asking why games criticism isn't good, it's because it doesn't need to be. The audience and the medium doesn't take it seriously. It has no reason to take itself seriously. For example, we had this one now. Yeah, this all sucked, but why can't anyone find anything to say about it other than I'm so disappointed that Sonic isn't good? We've been disappointed that Sonic isn't good for 10 years. We know this. We know the game was bad. We knew it was bad before it was going to come out because it's a Sonic game. But then, why can't we look at this and say, well, might there be some? Well, people read Plan 9 as though it's a nuclear war allegory. It's not, but people read it that way. Could we look at this and say, well, this is about cute animals and not so cute animals and that sort of thing? See, I'm having trouble with it, but I'm sure someone could come up with something about the way that he's cute when he's a hedgehog, but he's evil because now he's whatever the hell he was. Wolf, werehog, whatever the hell it is. Whatever the hell they meant that to be. Surely, maybe that commentary is not in the game, but so what? Every other medium has gotten into depth of the author. We could too. Of being able to say, well, I don't care what you meant, what you meant the game to say. Everyone said, well, Resident Evil 5 might have some racist elements to it, and everyone immediately jumped to, no, because no one at Capcom is racist. Well, that doesn't mean anything. It can still be the way, it can still get in there, and if not, someone could interpret it as it. A reaction is completely valid. Try. Even if it's not in there. Call that meaning and frivolity. Why do we need a game to say up front that it's serious for us to take it seriously? If a game comes up and says, like right up front, well, I'm a social game, oh gosh, thank you. Wow. Super service. If a game comes out and says up front, well, I'm not taking this seriously, we say okay for the most part. If it's a casual game or a social game or whatnot, we look at it and say, well, okay, it's just one of those, therefore we don't need to try. Here's the review, the graphics are okay, whatever. Why not? Tetris is probably the best-selling puzzle game, period, of at least the 20th century, in terms of how many things units it's moved, how many times it's been ported around. It is like an epic-defining landmark. Why can't I find, without really, really digging for it, anyone trying to say anything philosophical about it? I bet there has been, right?
I just thought
You have? I am learning so much. This is great because I'm not like throwing these out like usually when someone says, why can't I find, they're trying to say, they're saying, but I know that there isn't and that's why I'm asking. No, I'm literally asking. Please tell me. You have, yes?
Janet Murray's famous for criticism of Tetris, where she talks about overtaxed American lives and trying to fit everything into a limited day schedule.
Right.
Right, and as an allegory, and people sort of tear into her for that. But
I got tired of Tetris being used to break the story. Games tell stories. Every sort of narrative model for games, everyone, the Tetris doesn't do that. So I actually used it as the basis of my games tell stories philosophy.
This is what it's like to do this in front of smart people.
right. I think it's
you don't get that in movies, do you?
I think it was Stephen
Sometimes.
Poole. Wait, it's Stephen Poole who said that maybe we don't have a Citizen Kane, but cinema doesn't have a Tetris.
This is true. I like that quote, and I'm going to steal it from you.
Good choice.
It's an accreditation, of course. So we've had that, and now did those come out right after Tetris came out, or was that years later?
10 and then 20.
Well, that's good. Could stand to speed up a little bit. Because why does it need to exist for so long before people start writing about it? Citizen Kane didn't get recognized right away, but people were writing about it and calling it this is a huge thing. It was a big enough deal for William Randolph Hearst to ruin everyone involved's career over just because he was mad that they used his word and his entire life story, but really he was mad about the word. I won't get into the scatological descriptions of what that rose book was actually a reference to. Look it up. You'll find it.
Because in most of the cases, what doesn't matter in video games is about money.
Damn right.
It's the same with Robot Unicorn Attack. Robot Unicorn Attack is a great game as a game design. It's very well made. But when you see it when it went out, there are so many reviewers that say, oh, this game sucks. But when it hits 1 million views or some sort of stuff, there started being so many guys think, oh, this game is so well made. It's because of money.
There you go. I like that. I like that. The money aspect is the problem. That is sort of the elephant in the room. Is the economic aspect. For another example of sorry, I'll skip to the end then because I ramble, and for that I am sorry. I like Tron, so there's a picture of that. What it comes down to is, I think, the idea of a young medium. The reason game criticism isn't quite there yet is because the medium is still getting there. And I know that's not a popular thing to say, that that maybe it hasn't arrived. It's arrived in some senses, in others, it's catching up. I disagree with Dan for most strongly in the sense that that it needs to be completely divorced from literature and other forms of art. Not if it's also going to use them. If games don't want to be treated like movies, don't make them look like movies. Don't score them like movies. Don't have a cinematics. We want that seems to be what the market is asking for. And if I can't if you don't want me to review Call of Duty as if it's Black Hawk Down, don't try to be Black Hawk Down. It's different to review colored lights moving around. So I guess that is where I would summarize as young medium, but getting better. And that's just true for the criticism as it is for the medium itself. Thank you.
So how are we doing on time here? Do we
You
have?
already used up all your time and 5 minutes more.
All right. So
Well,
we're
the whole conference is running a little late, so we can take a few questions, I think. Maybe 5 minutes for the
Let's do a few
question.
questions. Yes.
I'm wondering if, sort of, in answer to, I guess, more Bob's question about where are the people that are, where is the criticism of text and line, where are the philosophical discussion. I'm wondering if part of the problem is that there is now such a, for lack of a word, diaspora of publication on the internet. It used to be that, you had magazines, and that was where you went, and the game criticism and game culture was centered around those magazines. Whereas now, everybody's got a blog. And so it could be that, like, many people are having these deep, interesting, fascinating, game critical, ventures in the privacy of their own blog that only 20 people are reading. So I'm sort of wondering, like, what are your takes on that, and where do you see that going? And if you are one of those people who is just talking around the table with their friends and having brilliant, thoughts about the literature nature of Dante's Inferno, how do we get that out into the general conversation?
If it's happening digitally, it will get out there into the general conversation. And I can say that from personal experience because I am here today because I put video reviews up on YouTube and the Escapist gave me a job for that. So the cream rises, it is still true that cream rises to the top. It still happens.
This is happening all the time. This was our lunch discussion. And really, one of the things is I had another slide about the depth of game criticism is it's really about official versus unofficial, right? Are there people paid to do this, or is it just something that happens naturally? Yeah. Like, are these games still being talked about after they release? Absolutely. You go up on like any MMO that has any sort of community has just more writing than everyone in this room will write. And it's out there, and it's just this torrent of talk about games. And to some degree, when you have that, there's this, there's no longer the critic in between the game developer and the player. The connection with modern technology and modern media is much more the developer and the player are interacting on a level that has, I don't know if that's ever existed in other types of media before. And one of the things about the nature of games is games are inherently an iterative creation. People say, well, what if no one tells you your game sucks, right? The process of creating a game is to create something that sucks and put it in front of players and have the players tell you that this sucks, or I'm confused, or this is weird, or I don't know about this, or I like this part. The entire process of making games is about feedback from players. Because we don't know how this code is going to run on people's brains, so we have to listen to people all the time. And really what's going on is you're starting to get tighter and tighter conversations happening between the players and the developers, and to some degree that's disintermediating the people who have been had some power in saying, well, oh, we're going to, in the office space. Well, what do? I take what the customer says and I carry that information over to the developer, and then the developer does the thing. Well, why can't the developer talk to the customer directly? Well, that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, we should probably cut it.
We should cut it off.
Oh.